We're now going to move on to A5, which is 18/012581. This is a detail. It is the one that we had at the last meeting, and we withdrew it because of various things that needed facing up to. So, right, Councillor Lang is upgraded or downgraded, whichever way you like to look at it. Matt Lang is going to take that one.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just draw members' attention to the update sheet where a revised set of conditions have been installed. These reflect the conditions on the previous detail approval and just pick up Highways recommendations and the implementation of an approved landscaping scheme that was relevant to the previous detail application. So the application site is located on Heath Road, Parsonage Lane, and the development relates to a 5-dwelling development which has outline permission that was granted on appeal and also has detail permission which was granted in 2017. This application seeks to approve variations to that detailed permission that were picked up during the construction of that development. And as you can see, they're listed there. There's certain proposals to remove triangular windows, the insertion of second floor rear Juliet balconies, the insertion of roof lights, changes to the facing materials on all plots, and the creation of second floor living accommodation within the roof of all 5 properties. This application site is located in Tendring, Tendring Heath. It's on the northern side of Parsonage Lane and to the eastern side of Heath Road. There's an aerial image of the photo. It's changed somewhat recently because the construction work is largely completed. That's the site layout plan that was approved as part of the previous detail application. Access was taken via Parsonage Lane. The properties all within rather spacious plots, all 5-bedroom properties with ample parking, and the detail of the layout remains unchanged. The changes that members are assessing tonight purely relate to materials and fenestration changes and the creation of second floor accommodation. So looking at the photographs, that's the site access on Parsonage Lane. So going through the changes to the materials, this is the plot 1, which is nearest the neighbouring property on Parsonage Lane. So changes here relate to the cladding, which is now pewter in colour, and a dark cream render, and previously it was warm pink render. So the cladding is as approved, but the render colour has changed. And to the rear, you can see that the Juliet balcony has been inserted at second floor level, which will serve a master bedroom. And this all looks out northwards over agricultural land to the rear. Plot 2, again, this is relates to red brick and dark cream render. So this was previously red brick and white render, so the cream render has been substituted. And again, a Juliet balcony to the rear. Plot 3, pewter cladding and dark cream render, and previously it was red brick and cream render. There's a picture of the rear again. Plot 4, now I believe that's moved on somewhat from that since that picture, but that consists of pewter and white cladding, and that's remained unchanged from before. And again, the Juliet balcony has been installed to the rear. And plot 5 is finished in red brick and dark cream render, and previously that was red brick and white render. And there's the rear view of that property. So these are the elevations that was previously approved. As you can see, there was a mixture of materials previously. There was pewter cladding, warm pink render, and these rather curious features above the windows, triangular windows above the first floor windows, and there was quite a large feature in plot 3 in the gable as well. They've all been removed from the scheme. So these are the elevations which reflect the photos I've just showed you. It's plot 2, plot 3, plot 4, and plot 5. So at first floor, these properties have 5 bedrooms, and into the second floor, a master bedroom has been inserted on all properties with the Juliet balcony facing northwards over the rear and the agricultural land to the back. And there's an ensuite bathroom being created at the front as well. So, looking at the merits of the scheme, officers believe that the changes that have been made are accurately reflected on the plans that have now been submitted. Obviously, the site does have permission in place, and obviously the elevations are in front of you there. Juliet balconies to the rear are actually considered to be an enhancement over the rather contrived triangular window features that were on the approved plans. And due to the separation to neighbouring properties, there's no overlooking concerns from the Juliet balconies at the rear. The properties to the side, there's roof lights also proposed, as you can see from these elevations. In the east-facing elevation or east-facing roof slope of each property, there's roof lights, but they're situated high enough in the roof slope not to cause any overlooking into neighbouring properties. So in terms of the materials proposed are considered to be acceptable. They relate appropriately to the character of the area, and they probably relate better, more closely than the rather varied scheme that was approved before. And as I said, the Juliet balconies are considered to be a better feature than the fenestration and triangular windows that were previously approved. It's also worth noting that the changes that have been made to these dwellings could have been made under permitted development rights once the occupier moved in and permitted development rights kicked in. So that's a fallback position which is worth understanding. So the application is recommended for approval. The development is considered to be acceptable. As I said, the layout previously approved the spacious development. There's a landscaping scheme that's been secured as part of the previous detail application, which secures the planting of 50 trees around the edge of the site. So in terms of, in the absence of any objections from consultees and the fact it enhances the scheme, it's recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have some public speaking. So Councillor Edwards, who is from the Parish Council and Chairman, I believe.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, I would like to just say one thing. The grade planning wasn't on the version of the plans that the Parish Council saw before. So I don't know where that came from. I wasn't aware that was in the approved scheme. But I can only take the word for it. But it's not what we saw in the plans that we saw before. It must have changed after that version. Mr. Chairman, committee members, this housing development is actually on a small scale. It's very similar to the ones that you've seen before already this evening, where there's an approval in place and a developer is squeezing more out of it at the expense of the area it's in. And that's essentially what my argument here is about this evening. It's also been mentioned about the Juliet balcony at the back doesn't overlook properties. I think the committee needs to be aware that there is already another property approved and under construction behind one of the houses next door but one, which is overlooked by the Juliet balconies from at least 3 of these new houses. And I don't think the site inspection today will have identified that, and certainly the planning department haven't identified that. When the original application came in, Tendring District Council Planning required the developers to make changes to the size and external appearance of the properties, and the delegated officer's report at that time specifically states this was to better fit the traditional character of houses in the immediate vicinity. During the construction, as it's been mentioned, it was noticed that the roof spaces of the houses were being built with an extra bedroom, so 6 bedrooms now, not 5-bedroom houses, with a Juliet balcony overlooking the rear and also overlooking the neighbours. They actually started to be marketed as 6-bedroom at that point. I contacted Tendring District Planning about this and was advised that a retrospective non-material amendment application had been submitted, but I pointed back that it's not non-material, it's a considerable change to the original design. This was accepted by TDC Planning, which is why we have this application before committee this evening. I appreciate that applying for retrospective planning is not illegal. However, it should not automatically be assumed by the developer that such an application will be approved, and therefore any building work is carried out at their risk. Given TDC's own requirement under the previous approved application, 1701-254, for changes to be made to better fit with the surrounding rural area, it's disappointing that TDC's planning recommendation for this amendment is to approve, on the grounds that any one of the purchasers could make these changes as soon as they move in under permitted development rights, as these have not been removed for these houses. Bear in mind, these are now 3-storey or 2.5-storey, whatever you want to call them, houses, in an area where most houses are actually low, relatively hip-proof style, quite rural country houses. I contend that while it's possible that a purchaser might make such a change in the future, approval of this application will mean that all 5 houses get those changes right now. Neighbours and the area are impacted right now. It also means the developer who has gone ahead and made the changes gets to benefit, as they can sell houses for a higher price. I'm not against developers making money. I am against developers squeezing more out of a development at the expense of the surrounding area and the existing residents. There's a real danger here that a precedent will be set, that Tendring District Council will allow any developer to exceed planning approval regardless of the impact on neighbours or on the rural nature of our villages or on the local facilities that a larger household would require to support it. There's a real danger that TDC will be seen not to enforce an approved planning decision and will just wave through the changes retrospectively, hiding behind permitted development rights. And there is a real danger that the residents of Tendring District will lose faith in the planning system to take into account all relevant matters and not just the developer's profit motive. I therefore ask the committee to consider the reputation of TDC planning in the eyes of the public, to stand up for the particular nature of our rural villages and our residents by refusing this application and not setting that precedent of assumed consent for going further and over and above the original approved application. The public needs to have faith in the planning system if it's to accept continued development under the new emerging local plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edwards. And now the ward councillor, for a second time this evening, Councillor Coley.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I ask you to reject this application for what was initially called a non-material amendment. Well, clearly the houses, as they are now already constructed, are starkly different from the original plans which received planning consent. The plans approved were for 2-storey dwellings. They are now 3-storey houses with a large bedroom and ensuite facilities, together with French doors and a Juliet balcony on the 3rd floor. They've not been constructed in accordance with the original approved plan. That original plan did not show a 3rd floor or Juliet balcony. The external appearance of these houses is now entirely different from that which was approved. These houses are significantly out of place in their rural setting. This application appears to be a cynical manipulation of the planning system. If the developer had originally submitted plans for 3-storey houses with balconies in this rural location, there would most likely have been a substantial number of additional local objections. However, it seems to be a good ploy to gain planning consent for a development of houses of a particular design and then build substantially different houses on the same plot. I understand that a developer is entitled to apply for retrospective planning permission, and permission should not be refused purely because it is a retrospective application. However, this application seeks approval for houses the design of which is unacceptable in this rural location. I understand that in general terms a house owner can increase the number of bedrooms in a house without planning approval. That is as long as the external appearance of the dwelling is not changed. In this case, the external appearance has changed fundamentally. From my observations, the 3rd floor and Juliet balconies had been constructed before this application was even submitted. This smacks of a bullying cynicism and a blatant disregard of the planning system in order to generate a substantially higher sale price. The developer has made the decision to carry out the work not in accordance with the approved planning consent. No one has forced the developer to do this, and I suspect this was a purely financial consideration decided upon some considerable time ago. After all, bigger houses equal bigger sale prices. That decision was made at the developer's own risk, and any resulting reconstruction costs as a result of your refusal today is the developer's problem and should not be a concern of this committee. In 2015, officers refused the original application to build houses at this location. Their reasoning in just one aspect was that to build houses at this location outside the settlement development boundary would be socially unsustainable, due to the dependence of all occupants on motor cars for all their daily needs. As you know, the developer appealed that decision and won approval for 5 two-storey houses. This application will result in larger houses with a greater number of bedrooms, which will likely attract larger families with substantially greater reliance on a motor vehicle for their daily needs. However, you will note that the planning officers have now reversed their professional opinion and recommended approval. And I understand why. The houses are built. The deed is done. To reject this application will generate further work for planning and enforcement officers, and the applicant will most likely lodge a further appeal in any case. I'm sure those thoughts are in your mind, but for goodness sake, who is supposed to be in charge of planning in this district? The local housing authority, the district council, or the developers? If this planning application is granted, it will send a clear message to all developers in Tendring district that they can build whatever they like and disregard the approved plans with impunity. I sincerely urge you to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Colley. Now, the applicant, agent or representative is not here, so I'm going to turn to Matthew for any comments before we have a debate.
Yeah, if I could just pick up on a few points. In terms of overlooking from the Juliet balconies, there's a approximately 50-metre separation from plot 1, plot 2 to the new replacement dwelling being built at the rear, which significantly exceeds the back-to-back distances that you'd expect in terms of overlooking and when there would be harm. So in that respect, it's not considered that would be a sustainable reason for refusal. In terms of the additional accommodation in the roof space, I just want to make clear that the mass, the bulk and the height of the dwellings is not changed from the approval. And obviously future occupants could convert the loft spaces and insert openings to the rear without planning permission. So whilst the accommodation is set over 3 floors, they are still 2-storey in their form and height in respect, and they're not higher than the adjacent properties, and they do not appear as full 3-storey properties. And that's all I want to pick up at this stage. Thank you.
Right, I'm starting to get a list, so Councillor Heaney is first.
Well, I was driving past these properties with my husband the other day, and he suddenly turned and looked at me and said, "My God, they're hideous." And what possessed them to put this pewter cladding on, for a start? And it's a rural location. And how dare they put in an extra floor? I mean, who does the developer think he is? He's got planning permission for 2 floors. What's he thinking of? Does he think he's going to bully us by the fact he's done it into agreeing to have a 3rd floor? If the householder wants to have a 3rd floor, they're perfectly able to come and apply for it. Not a man who's building them just to think, oh, well, I'll squeeze a bit more money out of this development and put in a 3rd floor. For a start, they are actually higher than the house next door. I've noticed that particularly. They're just too big, non-rural, totally urban, which is what I was banging on about before in the Misty development. And they're just hideous and shouldn't have been built there at all. They could have just made something that looks a bit more nice. I know they say they've got this pewter thing in the Essex Design Guide, but not in this area. Sorry, I just think they're so ghastly, I can't say anything about them.
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, the last time we went to look at this before today, we was only asked about the cladding, the frontage, the aesthetics of the house. We wasn't told then that it was a 3-storey building.
No.
Was we?
No.
I mean, when did they actually get permission to build the 3 stories?
Didn't.
Or did they need it?
No, that's
Sorry.
Yeah, obviously that's what members are assessing now. Basically what the size, the massing, the footprint, the height of the buildings hasn't changed from the approval. All you're assessing is basically the materials and the insertion of the fenestration that's been undertaken. Obviously they have gone into the loft space, but it hasn't increased the height of the properties that were approved. So you're assessing pretty much the cosmetics of the application, the aesthetics, the materials, and the insertion of the fenestration.
And the three-storey, second storey, surely.
Please do, yeah.
But we wasn't...
Mike.
We wasn't told on the last meeting. All we was asked to do was to assess and have a look at the copper cladding and the walls. Pink was a horrible colour, I thought, at the time, and that's all I thought. I didn't think that this particular plan was for the 3 stories. I just assumed that was how they was built application. I didn't know that they'd been put in after the fact. I don't think I've ever been told that.
No.
So I'm not very happy with coming in here with a half cocked.
Members weren't aware that they had put the 3rd story in, because this is the application which is before you now. Obviously they got permission for a 2-story development here, with accommodation set over 2 floors. Obviously once they started building, they converted the loft spaces without permission. So this application is to retrospectively seek permission for those changes.
Right. Yes, Councillor Fowler.
He wants to come back. John wants to come back.
Thank you, Chairman. This is why we do site visits, so that we can see for ourselves what has actually occurred here, and it is quite obvious, more obvious to us actually on the site visit what has happened, and it is contrary to what was originally submitted. And it is also out of character in that area, which is more important. I believe so. I believe it's out of character. So I would support refusal of this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Right. Councillor Everett.
I've got a slightly cynical question. How much does it cost to make a planning application for a 5-bedroom building, and how much does it cost to make a planning application for a 6-bedroom building?
It's the same fee. The fee's based on per dwelling rather than bedroom number. That's right.
Yeah, let's see if I got anybody.
Linda wants to speak.
Oh, yeah, Councillor McWilliams, and then I'll allow the solicitor to have a word.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering if our officer wouldn't mind putting up one of those pictures with the balcony. Yeah, you see, that balcony just says 3-story. It just makes it look as though it actually is. I think that is the biggest problem I personally have got with that. And I don't know how but I just wanted to say that just puts me off. If that wasn't there, and I appreciate that it actually looks better than those triangular windows. They didn't look very nice either, but it's all to do with design, isn't it? At the end.
Solicitor wants to ask a question, so...
I think Linda's just touched on it, actually. It's just about, I know you've spoken about it being out of keeping, but it's comparing what's allowed currently in the extant permission to what they're asking for now. So in terms of reasons, I just think we'd need a bit more detail on identifying what the harm is between the difference of the triangular windows and the Juliet balconies and the colouring, because they're the only changes to the extant permission. I think that would be helpful.
The triangular windows didn't mean that there was a room up there. I didn't even know there was a room up there. It's the bedroom and the bathroom. No one even said that to me. The plans didn't show it, did they? Not the plans we see, anyway. So I'm completely in the dark here. I'm still in the dark. I now know that there's a bedroom with and that's, never mind the triangular windows and all that. I mean, I assumed that it was a two-storey house. I couldn't understand why they had the triangular windows in the top anyway, but I didn't, for 1 minute, think that there was a complete floor up there. That was a livable room, livable area.
Right. Yes, Councillor Heaney.
You say there's no harm. The solicitor, Charlotte, you say there's no harm in it. Sorry, I didn't mean that. Sorry, well, you said there wasn't. It didn't appear. You didn't say there was no harm. Sorry, let me rephrase that. But we had to find reasons because it looked different outside. But the thing is that it's an absolute kick in the face for the planning committee, the planning officers, and everybody else if these people are allowed to just build as many stories as they like without getting planning permission. It's just. I think the district councillor made a very good point. You know, we're in charge of planning, not some developer who comes along and says, oh, I'll squeeze a bit more money out of this house. It's just not on whether it makes a difference to the outside or not. It's unacceptable.
Just to emphasise, while we've got that drawing up, the height of the building is no higher than the approved height. So the shape of the building, it just so happens that they are using, they're getting an additional floor in what we might have previously assumed was going to be a normal loft or something like that. But as far as I can see, and I'm sure you'll tell me if I'm wrong, we only see on that drawing two levels. We see the ground floor and we see presumably the first floor, but they were approved anyhow, but as the officer recommended, he says that had people bought them and moved in, then they could do it under permitted developments anyhow. Right, Councillor Bennison.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted some clarification from Matthew about the original use of the attic rooms. The triangular windows were presumably just there to provide light to the attic space. But with the benefit of hindsight now, it looks as though perhaps they were always intending for those to be bedrooms, because you don't just add a bedroom in a loft, you've got to put the staircases in. So it just makes me wonder whether the intention all along was to create a sixth bedroom in the loft, and these Juliet balconies have just come on at the final stage. So did we have any detail of what was going on in the loft at when they first applied?
Yeah, so you can see in front of you that the extent of the floor plans we received were ground floor plan and first floor plan, and there's no staircase in the first floor plan showing access to an additional bedroom. Yeah, so they were obviously design features, glazing to the gable, which would light the loft space. That's the only information we would have had at that stage.
So when building inspections took place, did nobody notice that an additional staircase was being constructed up into the attic space?
I wouldn't know who the building inspector. It may have been outsourced to an outside building inspector. In most cases it is. And then you haven't got that link with officers. But obviously it was picked up, and that's why they've put the application in to seek to rectify it.
I'll go Councillor Alexander first, and then Councillor Holmes.
Brown.
Councillor Alexander, then I'll go Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Initially, permission was given for a two-storey property. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. The accommodation was set over two floors, and it was a two-storey dwelling.
So, if the application before us in that location would have said this is a three-storey building with loft, would we have looked at that application in an entirely different way? Because I think we would have done.
Absolutely.
What has happened here is it brings to my again very much to the forefront of why are we here. You can justify all you want as officers why this should be remaining, but that was the permission that was given by this committee, and the committee is now trying to justify why that should just stay as it is.
Didn't come to committee, did it?
But I think it's very important that we do not lose face, because we need to show the general public that we are able to give planning permission and to ensure that that is carried out in accordance to what we give. After all, the impact is to the local environment and the people who live around it. Personally, I think they're absolutely ghastly, those houses.
Right. The question's been asked, was it a committee decision or was it the officer's decision?
Yeah, so the outline was granted on appeal, and then the reserved matters application was delegated decision, so it didn't come before committee. I would just add, in terms of retrospective applications, we have to deal with them the same. Irrespective if it's been built out or if it hasn't, we have to look at the same arguments, the design aspects, and whether it's out of keeping in the character of the area. So in respect to your question, the fact that officers are now supporting the scheme with a second floor accommodation and Juliet balcony at the back means that we would have supported it if that is what they would have come in originally.
Yep, Councillor Holmes, I did promise.
It shows 2 stories, so this is the first time that we, as a committee, have had a chance to rule on this plots. I say we refuse it and get them to take the roof space down unless they apply for proper permission to do it. And you can't just build a room in a loft. I mean, it's just not on. You certainly need building regulations anyway. You might need not permission, but you do need building regulations. And we haven't seen any of that. It's just been kept from us as a committee. Sorry.
Right, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. My question really has largely been answered by the last 2 councillors. But what I will say, have we got a plan of the 3rd floor now? Or the second one where the staircase comes in? The floor plan is totally different. I mean, this takes planning, an advanced planning, I would have thought. I mean, he's had permission for 2 stories, but that takes planning to change everything round. It smacks of, I'm going to do this a little later, I think.
Right. Yes, could ask Head of Planning to speak.
Thanks, Chair. I think there seem to be sort of 2 groups of issues that members are debating, really. One of them's around the appearance and the design changes to the external appearance. See, they're really sort of legitimate reasons on which to consider the application. So I think there was some concern about the introduction of the Juliet balcony as a feature, perhaps not being sort of typical of that rural location, and the choice of colours as well. Was there one other?
That pewter.
Yeah, so the colours.
Pewter, God.
So those changes from what was originally approved could form a reason for refusal. I think the second kind of group of issues that members are talking about are the fact that it's a retrospective application and that the developer may have planned to make this change. And there's some concern that this isn't entirely sort of open and transparent. But I'll just repeat really what Matthew said, that we have to deal with applications as they are, whether they're retrospective or whether they're looking to the future. And I would discourage you from having a reason for refusal about the fact that it's retrospective, or the fact that the third floor's been inserted, because that introduction of the third floor hasn't impacted on the bulk or appearance of the property, apart from the introduction, the substitution of those triangular windows for the Juliet balcony. So I would suggest you focus on those changes in appearance rather than the additional floor.
It's quite obvious looking at the front. If you look at the front, that you've got a picture there. They don't want us to know that there's anything in the loft, because they've hidden the fact. But before, the little glasses, this might not have happened. But when we was asked to change it all round, they just done it. You know, to me, it's total breach of building. You can't just build what you want. I mean, you know that. If I'd done a loft, I had to get building permission.
Right, I'm getting a list of suppliers now. Councillor Alexander.
Am I right in saying there's Velux windows in the roof? Were they there at the original application?
No, the Velux windows in the east-facing roof slopes are all new as well.
By their introduction means, because they look like either 24 or 36s, which are quite substantially large areas of glass. They are there for a specific reason. My question to you is that why have they appeared now, and have they now, by placed them in there, they have now altered the design of the building, therefore they need planning permission to put what's inside there in situ. Isn't that, have I got that wrong?
The planning permission is required for the insertion of the Velux windows, the Juliet balcony, all external features. The internal features don't need planning permission. It's purely the external features we're assessing.
We heard from one of the speakers, one of our councillors, who informed us that you are allowed to put extra bedrooms, etc., as long as it did not interfere with the actual construction of the house. Placing great Velux windows in the roof space, which is visible to everyone, isn't that altering the shape and design of the property?
Yes, that's why they need planning permission. So yeah, because they're altering what was approved, the external features, that's why they've applied.
Right. I think Councillor Heaney is the next one on the list.
I just wonder how they were allowed to build such big houses in a rural area. I mean, they're much more bulkier. We were in the bus next to the one next to it, and that hardly came up much above the roof line on the right there. They're so much smaller. How was it that they got permission? Was it on appeal or? So the appeal. So they came in like this. You turned them down, this design, and then they came back and they got it on appeal, these vast mansions. That was the case. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Benson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we should learn some lessons from this case, because this is... I can't see that we're going to be able to refuse this. But I think this, as a lesson to be learned, a salutary lesson, that we should put conditions in future developments of this size, or with a roof of that height. We should put conditions in that no building of rooms should take place in the attic space, if that's possible. I don't know if that would be allowed to.
Well,
in
I think
future
in this
developments.
particular case, it was granted by an inspector.
Yeah.
So,
but if we
is difficult.
But if we approve applications in the future,
yeah,
perhaps it would be something that we could add in future. Thank you.
Right. Now, Head of Planning has given you some thoughts on what you could use for a refusal if you were minded to. Councillor McWilliams next.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to take up on what you were saying there and what our Head of Planning has already said. I obviously agree about the situation with that being an extra room up there. I think we should just keep away from that because we should. But it is on the appearance, definitely on the appearance of what we've got before us tonight. And I just get the general feeling that the majority of us sitting here, we don't like it. And if we don't like it, we should just go, if you don't mind, Chairman, for a refusal of the application.
You will propose a refusal. Councillor Everett, you're on the list next.
Thank you. Yes, I was following the line of thinking that Kath gave us as well. I was looking up QL9, design of new development. Now, we all went on a design course recently and looked at examples of good and bad design, and it's quite subjective, actually, to be quite honest. But one of the things that I came across when I was looking at Site 1 with the... actually, can you go back to that? That's the one. It doesn't look holistic to me. It looks as though there's been added up in the top. Yeah. And that, in design terms, just seems wrong. And everybody around this table seems to be saying that it's wrong in various different ways. And so I think that does bring us to policy QL9, either 1 or 2 or a combination of both, which are new buildings, alterations and structures are well designed and should maintain or enhance local character and distinctiveness. And 2, the development relates well to its site and surroundings, particularly in relation to its siting, height, scale, massing, form, design and materials. And in my humble opinion, it don't.
Right. Now, we've got to the end of our list. As I understand it, I've got a proposal for a refusal, in which case I'm looking for a seconder at this time. Councillor Brown, all right, and Councillor Hone, right. In which case, before I take the vote, I'm going to ask the officer to comment.
Yeah, if I could just round up the reasons from my understanding. So we're saying, obviously, the Juliet balconies are out of keeping. They fail QL9, poor design, and they do not enhance local distinctiveness. And also the proposed colours of the cladding is considered to be out of character in that location.
Can I just say something? Just one thing.
Yes.
I'm just looking here and it says... It says the insertion of roof lights, changes to fascia materials on the plots, which is what we're discussing, and then it says, and creation of a second floor living accommodation. So if we refuse this, are we refusing the accommodation as well? Because so far we're only talking about fenestrations and everything else, Juliet windows and... We're not talking about this particular floor.
Yeah, I would say that they're all linked. So obviously, if we refuse the Juliet balcony, then it's all linked. It's all part of the same development. Obviously, they could. They could. We'd have to look at obviously enforcement options and look at that route. But if we asked them to remove the Juliet balcony, they could keep that accommodation at that second floor because that doesn't require planning permission in its own right.
Councillor McWilliams?
Yes, can I just say, sorry, Councillor Holmes, but that's where I was coming from, purely on the design and how that is, and not the actual floor space. That could go back to whatever they choose it to be as an attic. So that's really where I was coming from when I put the proposal forward.
Also, there was mention that councillors didn't like the Velox windows stuck in, which does need additional planning permission. Whether we'd mentioned that in the refusal as well.
I'd say the Velox features are more hidden than the Juliet balconies. They're on the east-facing roof slopes, and they're less intrusive. So I would say that'd be difficult to sustain a refusal on those grounds.
Right. So on the points that have been raised with a proposer and a seconder, you know what you're voting for. It is against officers' recommendations, so we've got to get these points tied. With those tied down, then I'm going to ask you to vote now. Those in favour of refusal, please show. And I'll stick my 2 penneth in so it's unanimous. It is refused. Thank you very much. Right, now we move to A6. I'm looking at the clock. This is planning application 18011489 full. It's land adjacent to 28 Ashlyns Road, although as we saw it this morning, it is actually facing Upper 2nd Avenue. Right. Straight to Matt again, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. So this application relates to development on the corner of Ashlyns Road and Upper 2nd Avenue in Frinton. Members may recall that they approved a dwelling in May of this year on this plot, and this looks to incorporate changes to that approval. So the application site forms the side garden of number 28, Ashlyns Road. It's within the northern extremity of the Frinton Conservation Area, and it's also part of the Avenues Garden of special character. You can see from the aerial photo, the land's largely laid to grass, and there's a mature hedgerow that runs around the perimeters of the plot. This is a view of the site frontage onto 2nd Avenue, and the access will be made roughly in this location here. This is a view of the corner of the site. And this is a view looking north, and the dwelling will be located in this northern part of the site within the grassed area. It's the eastern elevation of the applicant's property, number 28 Ashlyns Road. The garage is to remain in situ. This is the opposite corner plot at the beginning of Upper 2nd Avenue. This is the corner plot on the southern side of opposite the site. And this is the northern boundary of the site with the facing flank of the neighbouring property to the north. This is an access that runs to an amenity area at the back of the site. So this was the scheme approved in May of this year. Traditional arts and crafts style design with tile hanging and obviously features that are prevalent in the Frinton Conservation Area. As you can see from the block plan, access was to be sought from Upper 2nd Avenue with a parking space and an integral garage with a amenity space to the rear. The corner of the plot was to be retained and left open to preserve the conservation area and the spacious feel as you enter Upper 2nd Avenue. So this proposal seeks various changes to the approval, as I stated earlier. The proposal seeks to increase the depth of the property by 95 centimetres, seeks to push it back within the plot by 95 centimetres in line with the property to the north, seeks to reduce the size of the garage to include a utility room and to include an extra parking space at the front, so there'll be 2 parking spaces to the front of the property to compensate the fact that the garage is being reduced in size. So these are the proposed elevations. The size and the height of the property, obviously there is an increase in the depth by 95 centimetres, but the height is as before. And also there's some roof lights been included in the rear elevation and the northern elevation of the property to accommodate a family room at 2nd floor. So as you can see, the roof lights are located to the rear and to the north, so in their least prominent positions. So, in officer's view, the changes proposed do not significantly alter the appearance of the property. It still retains its arts and craft features, Obviously, it's slightly deeper in and it fills the plot slightly more, but obviously it's been set back to be in line and to include 2 parking spaces to the front. There's no increase in the height of the dwelling, as I stated before, and there's a slight increase in depth, which do not cause demonstrable harm. The roof lights are sited to the rear and to the north, so they're in the least prominent locations. They wouldn't be visible from the most important views of the property at Ashlyns Road. And the 2 parking spaces to the front are to be retained, and the garden size accords with SAVE policies, which states it's over 100 square metres in size. So due to there not being considered to be any adverse impact from the proposed changes, the scheme isn't considered to be significantly different from that approved in May by members, and it's not considered to be detrimental to the conservation area or the avenue character policies. So the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have speakers on this one. Call Mr. Alan Eldred speaking against the application. Welcome, Mr. Eldred. You are well aware that you're getting 3 minutes once you're settled.
Possible to have the second slide up that we have, please, showing the site plan.
That one?
No, next one.
That one?
That shows even better. Good evening. I'm chairman of the Frinton Residents Association, and one of our main interests is to make sure we conserve our conservation area. And this site is within the Frinton Conservation Area. And I believe this development is not in line with some of the policies of the conservation area. I've no doubt Councillor Turner will elaborate on those later, so I won't go into too much detail. I also realise we've already approved a development on this site which can't do anything about it. It's smaller, and I think what we can do is ensure we don't make the situation worse by allowing what I consider to be an out-of-place overdevelopment, which will be out of keeping with its surroundings. The bulk and appearance of this building have been changed by this revised plan. And just to show the difference on that site, firstly, the site plan is a bit misleading because you can see there it shows the red line, it shows a rather parallel site, whereas the actual block plan, which is showing the details you can take measurements on, actually shows a minimal clearance around the house, and then tapers significantly towards the rear so that the actual site finishes on the front of the garage, not parallel as it's shown there. Therefore, a much smaller site, although it is the same as it was approved originally. Also, the officer's report, 0.66, I assume in response to the change in position of the size and the situation of the building, states the rear garden is slightly reduced, but will still be in excess of the council's adopted standard at 125 square metres in size. I don't believe this is true. My calculations show that the rear amenity is going to be about 112 square metres or just over. My calculations have been made from these drawings, the drawing of the original agreed application, and also the latest drawing. And I've taken all their figures from there, so of course my figures ought to be true. I think the statement of 125 square metres on that rear amenity space is wrong and misleading, therefore. The Council's adopted standard, policy HG9, has been met, but as the rear amenity is nearer to 110 square metres now, on the statement that it meets HG9, I think because it's only 110 square metres, perhaps the preamble to that policy should have been taken account of, because it is a minimum of 100 square metres. And if you look at the preamble, paragraph 494 in our saved policies, it actually says it's important that private amenity space is a usable space appropriate to the size of the dwelling and its surroundings. Perhaps we should take note of that. I assume the officer was worried about the size of this rear amenity anyway when it was thought to be 125 square metres, as the condition is proposed to in inverted commas here, remove permitted development rights for roof additions, outbuildings and extensions, a condition that can be applied under policy HG9. This proposal, together with revised recalculations that I've made of the rear amenity space, I believe confirms that we're squeezing a large building onto a very small plot, and it's completely out of keeping with its surroundings and leaves a rear amenity space which is not appropriate to that dwelling. This is perhaps compounded by the developer, again showing some misleading figures on the drawings. The drawing that was agreed in May and the current drawing both show, or quote, a floor area of 79 square metres. Now, this is nonsense. It possibly was a mistake. As my calculations show, the whole building to have about 123 square metres total area, including the new side area. That's larger than the rear amenity space, and it's just a big, hideous building on this site. This Lotus proposal also is a 2.5 or 3-storey building, which is completely out of keeping with the dwellings in that surrounding area. For these reasons, I ask that you reject this application for an enlarged dwelling. It's not appropriate for the size of plot or its surroundings, and in this enlarged form does not preserve or enhance the function and character of the conservation area, which is one of our policies. Thank you. If these numbers are queried as a matter of interest, I've got all the calculations here, should later speakers wish to contradict or check them.
Thank you very much. And now it's the ward member, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening once again, fellow members, officers. When application 18/00428 came before you in May this year, I attempted to speak to you, but despite my best endeavours, didn't. 28 Ashlyns Road is a corner plot in the conservation area and has further protection in FW5 and PPL 11. Avenue areas of special character. So much so that FW5 makes special emphasis of corner plots by giving them more protection. This is to avoid what we have in front of us tonight. The horses have bolted, the milk has been spilt, and the principle of development has been agreed. You agreed to a 4-bedroomed house with an integral garage. This was to be in keeping with the conservation and avenues policies, both existing and emerging. As stated in a dismissal of Appeal 16/01229 on the 11th of October 2016, paragraphs 7, 8, 9 and 10 all refer to the design not being in keeping with the larger plot that it forms part of and the heritage asset number 28. It is far more in keeping with Upper Second, which is not part of the conservation area but adjacent to. Thus we have this new drawing agreed in May, which is meant to reflect the higher quality, carefully detailed arts and crafts architecture prevalent within the conservation area. This application is tinkering with the agreed design and only further reduces the relevance of building in the conservation area and the avenues of special character. There are no 3-storey standalone dwellings in Ashlyns Road. There is a very large house overlooking the Methodist Church Green that is 3 storeys split into 3 to form a small terrace. The garage will not be able to house a vehicle or car, thus extra car parking space will be required. This has 2 effects. It further reduces the spaciousness of this plot. It helps to turn the front garden into a car park. The rear garden is further reduced by the resiting of the dwelling and an increase of 0.95 metres of its footprint. All this is to make the house less in keeping with its neighbours and the street scene. The inspector noted that this plot contributes strongly to the spacious character of the area, thus making the application before us more and more like an inoffensive dwelling that can be found on a typical modern estate. I quote from the inspector's report, paragraph 8. The principle of development has been agreed, thus the haggling begins. I ask you to refuse these alterations as they will result in an overlarge dwelling not in keeping with its neighbours and not sitting comfortably in the street scene. PPL 8, conservation areas, little a. Scale and design, particularly in relation to neighbouring buildings and spaces. Little d, the importance of spaces to character and appearance. E, any important views in and out of or within the conservation area. FW5, proposed development which would result in a reduction in the spacious character of the area will be refused planning permission. PPL11, not appear cramped in the street scene. All these are very good reasons for refusal. I would also like to draw your attention to the gardens to the south of this plot, which you can see up there. To my eyes, it looks suspiciously like another area to be possibly developed. If that were to be the case, then our conservation areas and special area policies have been ripped up. What is the point of existing and emerging policies if we do not adhere and defend them? I ask you to refuse. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now, if my records are correct, I think Mr. Legree is going to speak on behalf of Zoe Manning, the designer. I have got that correct. Yeah.
Evening, Chair members. Indeed, Chairman, you may recall that I was the agent for the original application, which came before you just a few months or so ago. But the architect involved felt that the very minor changes didn't need my input at this stage. Obviously, she was wrong. How to say, this is not a cynical attempt to alter the scheme, as you may have heard on other applications this evening. But in fact, the applicant who's sitting in the auditorium was very aware of the comments from members at that previous meeting, where members actually expressed some concern about the position of the building forward of the building line, if one can call it that, along Upper Second. Nevertheless, members approved the scheme. However, in developing the scheme forward, doing the building regulations drawings and working up the scheme, it's been found that he can in fact set the building back by 3 foot, by the 0.95 of a metre. So in fact, he's actually listened to your concerns and taken those into account. Therefore, the impact of this development would actually be less than the scheme that members have already approved. In terms of the alterations, and I have to unfortunately contradict Councillor Turner in this case, there is no change to the external appearance that one would see from the public viewpoint of the building that's now proposed. It's the same design. There's no tinkering, it's the same design. The changes that we will be seeing are the 3 roof lights on the rear elevation and 2 roof lights on the north elevation, and there is an increase in the depth of the building by 3 foot, 0.95 of a metre. The requirement for garden areas is met within the scheme, and I'm not going to contradict the local resident. I'm sure that he's fully qualified in architectural matters to be able to provide those accurate figures, but nevertheless, regardless of whether it's 112 or 125 square metres, it meets your standards. That is what you must consider this evening. Therefore, there are no changes to the external appearance from Upper Second. There are no increased impacts upon the conservation area. There is no increase in the height or design of the building visible from Upper Second. You are only considering a couple of roof lights on the rear and side elevation, and the improvement by setting the building back by 3 foot. If that is not something that you feel that you can support, then clearly the applicant will build the scheme as approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any comments, Matt? No?
Can I ask him a question?
Matt, yes?
Surely there's a change to the garage. Mr. Legree said there was no changes. But the garage is going to be smaller now and turn into and have 2 parking in front and turn into a utility room or something. So there must be some change into the house.
Yeah, the external appearance of the garage will remain unaltered. That's what Mr. Legree was alluding to. The garage has been reduced in depth to accommodate a utility room at the back. So the garage is undersized in terms of the council's parking standards, but because there's 2 parking spaces to the front now proposed, there's still 2 spaces that will meet the requirements of the standards.
Right. Other speakers? Yes, Councillor Bennison.
Thank you, Chairman. So I've got two questions. Would it still be possible to use the garage to house a car? Has it been reduced in depth to the extent that it's not able to be used for garaging a car? And if the property is being moved back 0.93 metres, whatever it is that to allow space for parking of cars in the front? If it hadn't been moved back, would there be space to park those cars, presumably in that garden space at the front? Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the garage, I believe it has a depth of 4.4 metres, so it would probably be slightly too small to park a modern car in there, maybe a smart car, a smaller vehicle. In terms of setting back the property, there was a parking space proposed as part of the previous scheme, so there was ample space, but it's been set back to obviously be more in line with that property to the north and to provide space for a second parking space.
Yes, Councillor Bennison, I'll take you as a
Thank you.
second point.
In that case, I would like to say it's not a garage. If it can't accommodate a car, there's no point in calling it a garage.
Right, Councillor McWilliams.
I hasten to add, if it's like my garage, it's just used as storage. She says, am I not understanding something here quite correctly, Matthew? And perhaps you can put me right on it. But when it says under 1.2 and then it goes listing, the dwelling is increased in depth by 0.95 metres, which is the which is 1 foot or whatever it is. But it also says the dwelling is set back into the plot by a further 0.95. So 2 of those equals 6 foot, not 3 foot. Am I right? So overall, it is going back 6 foot.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's all right. I just wanted to get that right in my mind before I thought of anything else. Thank you.
Further points?
Richard.
Councillor Everett.
Yeah, in the officer's report on page 155, it said Ashlyns Road and the southern part of the Upper Second Avenue are residential roads which form part of the avenue's area of special character. I wasn't even aware, and I live in Frinton, that there was such a thing as a policy called the avenue's area of special character, so I looked it up. In both the 2007 plan and, in fact, in the emerging plan as well. And there's quite long bits about it, like a couple of paragraphs in the 2007 plan and a paragraph in the emerging local plan. So I'm going to read you the emerging local plan one because it actually puts a different complexion onto the way that we should perhaps be looking at this. The avenues to the west of Connaught Avenue Shopping Centre and north of the Esplanade form a sedate residential area of outstanding Arcadian character. I had to look that up. With wide, straight, tree and hedge-lined avenues, grass verges and large, spacious detached houses set in mature gardens. This residential character forms an important quality of this part of the Frinton and Walton Conservation Area, where new development affecting its character or appearance is subject to special scrutiny. If changes of use, subdivision to flats or redevelopment for higher density housing were to continue to occur, the area's outstanding character and the quiet enjoyment of residents in the locality would be eroded, and therefore this local plan affords additional protection. Well-designed infill development might exceptionally be permitted on larger plots if the special character of the area would be safeguarded. It then goes into policy, actually it's PPL 12, not 11, the Avenues area of special character, Frinton-on-Sea. Within the Avenues area of Frinton-on-Sea, new development must have particular regard to the special character and appearance of the area. To ensure that this special character is safeguarded, new development shall, A, conform to the existing density of development and not appear cramped or incongruous in the street scene. And I would argue that if you looked at the aerial view, and also the next slide on from that, that shows the area of where the house will be, then I would argue that that does not conform with that policy.
Right. Councillor Heaney?
This is a lesson to us in future not to allow houses with great high bulky roofs. And I noticed that Ashlyns Road goes down the hill. So this is going to actually bulk over the next door house much more on its very small plot, which shouldn't have been allowed in my view, who said it wasn't here at the time. But anyway, there we are. Not that I would have done anything different probably, but anyway. But it just does not fit in. You can see how much smaller the garden is. I know we're not discussing that. And then again, to let rooms in the roof, which can easily turn into bedrooms. It's a games room now, but it might be something else later. I'm not against it. I'm totally against it. And we're not following the bit that Richard has just read out, and in the new plan as well. So I really can't be approving of this.
Other speakers? It was highlighted earlier that, of course, there is an existing approval on this site. And so if you were minded to refuse it, you'd need the good reasons, and Richard's highlighted one of them, but it would still allow the existing permission to exist. Further speakers then? No?
I've still got my thing. The fact is the garage is now not going to be used as a garage because it's too small. And as Liz pointed out, and then they're going to have 2 big parking spaces in front of it and that very small garden. I think that's another, a small garden compared to Frinton. I think it's another reason, and it looks to me as though they're going to go for the next plot too, as well, as Councillor Turner was pointing out. We need to be aware of that. That really would be gross overdevelopment. It's just a pity this plot wasn't allowed to have more garden, because I think you can just see how much smaller it is. I mean, the garden almost looks half the size of some of those houses, and it's one of the bigger houses there. So I really think that they have to be content with the planning permission they've got and not try and get it any more.
Right. Any further thoughts or any proposals? Or have all the councillors fallen to sleep? It's now 10:15. But I would remind you we've got 2 more after this. So,
yes, I'll go for refusal.
Okay, I have a proposal of refusal. And just a reminder, as it's against officer's decision, or proposal rather, then we shall need to clock up the reasons. Richard has highlighted one, I would suggest, but
arguably 2, because it's FW5 and PPL12.
Right. I don't have a seconder for that so far. You'll second it, right? Good. If there's no further suggestions, I shall turn to Matthew for his thoughts on the suggested proposal.
I would say the difference to obviously the site has permission for a property, as you can see in front of you there. The main increase to the actual size of the building is the 0.95 metre in its depth, and I would say it would be difficult to defend that on appeal, the harm resulting from that additional 0.95 metres in depth.
What about the fact that they're taking up part of the garden with another parking space?
I think,
pretty small.
yeah, the parking area, the vast majority of the mature hedgerow around the site is going to be retained, so the parking area will be largely screened in views from surrounding the site. So the addition of an extra parking space at the front of the property, again, visually, in terms of the impact on the conservation area, would be hard to defend, I would advise.
I mean, can I
Yes, carry on that one.
I mean, if you're going to have two parking, it's a small garden, you've got to come in, both parking will have to be frontwards. There's no turning area there. They have to go in and out on the road, so there would be no hedge in front of the two parking areas, where there might have been hedge in front of the, one parking area, so they're losing more hedge, surely?
No, the amount of hedgerow being removed is the same. It's exactly the same as the approved, as you can see from that plan and on that block plan.
Right, Councillor Everett, you indicated.
As one of my councillor colleagues this afternoon said in an appeal in this very room, we don't draw red lines down on pieces of paper through which people can't go just for the hell of it. We don't use it to just use up the ink. We do it for a reason. If there is a view that an application should not be done within a certain area because it's over the red line, it's over the red line. It's not 1 inch over the red line, oh, it doesn't matter, or a mile over the red line, it doesn't matter. It's over the red line, full stop. And I think in this case to say, well, it's only a metre or it's only 3 foot, actually misses the point. It is, because of the nature of being taking up more space, it is therefore leaving less space for the amenity area and therefore infringing on the character of the area. Whether it's a foot or a mile, doesn't really matter.
Right. Any further points? If not, I have a proposer for refusal and a seconder for refusal, and hopefully we've got some points that will stand up in if and when challenged. With that in mind, I go to... Oh, yeah. All right, just before I take the vote. Yep.
It's just that Matthew mentioned the cars would be screened by the hedge. What's to stop the applicant taking that hedge out to gain further access to the car park, as Councillor Turner called it, at the front of the property?
Yeah, so the hedgerow would form part of the landscaping scheme, so we'd seek to secure its retention that way.
Right. Now, have you got it? You all know what you're voting on? Those in favour, then, please, of a refusal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Put mine in to make it unanimous. Okay. So, in that case, it is refused. Now, right, we now move on to A7. It's land of east of Pork Lane, Great Holland. It's planning application 18015771. It's an outline application, and Suzanne gets this one, and later on I have got some speakers. So, right, Suzanne, over to you.
Right, thank you, Chairman. Just to draw the members' attention to the update sheet, which refers to an additional letter of objection that has been received from a local resident and from Great Holland Residents Association, and that the recommendation has been amended to include a financial contribution towards public open space. So this is an outline application with all matters reserved for up to 5 bungalows. The site lies to the east of Pork Lane and measures approximately 0.4 hectares. And you'll note from the plan that the site is predominantly surrounded by residential properties, with these to the north of the site being recently constructed. So So this shows an aerial photograph of the site, which is predominantly sort of scrubland with a number of mature and semi-mature trees within it. And that is a site photograph of the view from the access point looking east into the application, or towards the application site. And that is a photograph of the access point and the relationship with the adjacent residential properties, or the property that is recently constructed. And this is a view of the site looking from the public right-of-way, which runs along the rear boundary, looking across the site, and these are the two newly constructed properties. So, as set out in the report, the application site, with the exception of the access, lies outside the settlement boundary for the saved and the emerging local plan. And therefore, as the council can demonstrate a 5-year housing supply, is contrary to policy QL1 and SPL1 of the emerging plan, which sets out that development should be focused towards the larger urban areas and to within development boundaries. And whilst the NPPF advocates a plan-led approach, it's necessary to consider if any circumstances outweigh this conflict. There have been a number of appeal decisions, some which are set out in the report, which demonstrate that an application site being outside the settlement boundary is not in itself sufficient justification to refuse the application for development. And it's considered that due to these decisions that paragraph 8 of the NPPF should be applied, and this relates to the economic and social and environmental objectives. So in this case, it's considered that given an appeal decision at Largest Farm, which is referred to in your committee report, that it cannot be argued that the site location is unsustainable. The construction of the dwellings will meet economic objectives, and given its location, as you'll see pointed out on this map, that it's adjacent to the development boundary on 3 sides, and it's almost infilling a gap. It's therefore considered that it would meet the environmental objectives. So this is an application site for the adjacent site. So the application that's under consideration is in this area, and that was refused in November 2017 on the basis that it was outside the settlement development boundary. And this was a decision that was taken before a number of appeal decisions were received, which, as material planning considerations, have caused officers to amend their approach to ensure that it's in accordance with the NPPF. So in terms of this application, as it is an outline application, there's no significant detail has been provided, although it shows that a perimeter around the edge of the site will remain undeveloped, and this means that sufficient distance is provided from the neighbouring properties to ensure that, subject to appropriate design, which would be controlled under a future application, that the site could be developed without harming neighbours' amenities. In terms of the current landscaping on the site, the landscape officer has advised that in terms of the amenity value of the woodland area, given the limited views and relatively poor quality of the majority of the trees on the land, that these don't merit formal protection. In addition, Essex County Council raised no objection to the proposal, subject to conditions which are included in the recommendation. And for those reasons, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out in the report.
Thank you very much. Now then, I have no member of the public speaking in favour, but I have a member of the public this evening speaking against, Mr. Ian Taylor. Welcome. Unusual for you to be in this position, I think.
Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak. And as you've indicated, I am an amateur at this. I've learnt more about planning this evening in the 4 hours I've been here than I have in my previous 60 years. So my admiration for you all knows no bounds, with no intention to try and curry favour. With regard to this application, it's a real head-scratcher. I'm here on behalf of local residents because they are generally quite a quiet, reticent people. They're living on the edge of a small village in the middle of this district, where they have been on the receiving end of numerous applications over previous years, and they're just starting to feel quite intimidated now. So they've asked me to try and speak for them on their behalf. We've had applications for 5 bungalows. It started off as an area of arable land. Then it was converted to paddock for grazing, and then the problem started with barns and chickens and horses and cars and all the other things that go with that. Then there were applications for large barns with the idea that development might follow later on. There are applications that were put in and refused, all because they're outside the agreed settlement boundary. Then came the letters saying they'd like a pig farm and a turkey farm, all the things that might be preferable to 5 or 6 or 10 bungalows. So residents have been enduring this for a number of years, trying to keep up with a number of orange planning notices posted on sort of lampposts up the road and trying to follow what's going on. So it's very difficult for them. But this, in essence, is outside the agreed settlement boundary that we all worked hard to try and establish with the council. Over many years, we diligently came along to consultations, we made our point, and it was all agreed that this area would be outside the agreed settlement boundary. And it's very easy for people, the planning officers, to decry this as a piece of scrub land, which it so certainly isn't. If you want to destroy something like a lovely building or an area of natural woodland spinney, then the easiest thing to do is just to decry it and say that it's just merely scrub or it's rubbish. And it isn't. I've personally witnessed, deer walking along that path and using that woodland. I personally have a pond in my garden that's populated by newts and frogs that I certainly didn't put there. We see foxes, roosting birds all the time. It's a nice local amenity adjacent to a public right-of-way, which is very well used. And Pork Lane was on the verge of being designated a quiet lane. It has many bridleways off of it. Horses walk up and down that road. People walk their dogs. It's an area of some charm and character. Every house has an individual name. Every house in the road is different. It's not an outstanding development. People don't go wow when they walk up Pork Lane. But it has its own unique charm, which has been ended by the speculative development that was allowed during that brief period where we didn't have our 5-year land supply, and 2 bungalows were permitted in this area. In fact, there was permission for 3, but some conveniently only 2 were built because they managed to retain the area which was going to be used for access for further speculative development later on, which is indeed what's happened. So it is backland development in our opinion. I leave that for you to decide whether that is the case. And in the case of trying to develop areas such as this, there's usually about 6 criteria which were laid out in the officer's report. And it does ask that they all are complied with. And I really have struggled to try and find any that are really complied with this. But certainly it does require a long driveway, which is contrary. It certainly is on the edge of defined settlements, and it certainly is out of character with the area, and it undoubtedly will set a harmful precedent for other similar forms of development, as we know. The entrance is odd, and that's proven by the fact that there is a requirement been put in for a communal recycling or refuse area, because there's concerns already about a refuse truck going up there and being able to collect. That will sit in the lane. It is outside the 30 mile an hour, which in the report says is just nearby, but it isn't. It's actually quite some distance away. So vehicles are travelling at 60 miles an hour, the national speed limit, when they go past this entrance. And they do, all the time. It was accepted within the report by the planner that this is not a site for a preferred location for growth. Paragraph 6.12 of the own report says that. So the head scratcher is why we've tried so hard to accommodate what is at best a speculative development and at worst a wholly inappropriate one. It doesn't appear to have any of the sustainable requirements under NPPF, paragraph 8. I mean, to say that it's economically sustainable by providing employment opportunities during the period of construction, when we have one local pub and a farm shop that's not open every day, that is really stretching it. As is the sort of social sustainable, which they claim, is based on an inspector's decision that there was a bus stop nearby, a similar application made further within the village. Now, that bus stop was actually outside that particular development. This one is half a mile away, and it serves an erratic and infrequent bus service. Everybody using this area is wholly dependent on the car. There is no GP surgery, no primary school, no recognisable
defined village centre or railway station in this area. All of the things which mitigate against it. And to come back to the environmental issues, which are also part of this same thing, we honestly thought that the aim was to protect and enhance the natural built and historic environment. And I'm unable to see how removing a spinney with an abundance of wildlife meets that requirement. To say that people's gardens are an improvement on an area of scrubland is easy to say, but the reality is that this is a natural area of countryside outside of an agreed settlement boundary, and building 5 bungalows and asking people to garden them nicely is not an improvement on that. And above all, the biggest talking point of any resident that lives in this area of Portland...
Can you begin to wind up?
I beg your pardon, Chairman, I really will finish. Is that none of these properties are on mains drainage, and neither will these new developments be on mains drainage. And with the heavy clay subsoil, surface flooding onto the road and in the surrounding areas is a significant ongoing problem all year round. And there was absolutely no mention of this either in the planning report or in the application. So I beg your indulgence for the time. I really do ask you to use your wisdom and to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No ward member, no parish council member. Therefore, Mr. Peter Legree, please.
Chairman, unfortunately there's a large number of errors in the last report that you've just received. First of all, start off by saying that the various planning applications that were referred to have nothing to do with this site whatsoever. They refer to the land to the north of the paddocks, as you see on that plan. That's arable land, has been arable land, turned into paddocks, paddock land, but has no relationship or relevance to this proposal whatsoever. The site is not an amenity area. It's simply an area that's been allowed to become overgrown. An amenity area can only be an amenity if it's available to the public. This is not available to the public. And equally, precedent has been mentioned, and I'm sure that you've heard this on many, many occasions from your officers, that precedent is not an argument that you can put forward for a planning reason for refusal. The site is a backland development, no question of that. It's also unused. It's, as the officers mentioned, it's surrounded on 3 sides with residential development. Members must consider what is the impact of this scheme on the wider area. As it was mentioned on site this morning, there's policy QL1. Policy QL1 is important. There's no question of that. However, policy QL1 is not a reason alone to oppose a development. And that is really the essence of the report that has been put forward to you by the head of planning. Numerous appeal decisions, some of which have been mentioned. There are also other appeal decisions that also apply to Great Holland, which again, not just Largest Farm, which was one of mine, but other cases that I've put forward and also one on appeal have consistently shown that the village is a sustainable settlement. But what I would like to do is draw your attention to an appeal decision that came forward 2 weeks ago for a site in Great Oakley. That site affected a listed building, was a backland development with a very long driveway, probably twice, if not 3 times the length of the one that's before you this evening. It's in a coastal protection belt and outside the settlement boundary for policy QL1. The inspector, in his decision letter, stated there would be conflict with policy QL1 in terms of the site location beyond the settlement development boundary. It is important to consider whether any circumstances outweigh this conflict. In this instance, the effect of the development on the character of the countryside indicate that the site would provide an appropriate location for housing. Therefore, I give limited weight to this policy conflict. The inspector went on to say there would be an acceptable effect on the character and appearance of the surrounding area and acceptable access to services and facilities. I give little weight to the conflict with policy QL1 and EN3, which is the Coastal Protection Belt policy. That was 2 weeks ago. I can only suggest that members take notice of all of those appeal decisions, because obviously the alternative is an appeal that will be submitted in terms of this site. Can I also just point out a couple of issues that may not have been too clear on the site visit this morning and looking at that plan, and the photograph that you saw. The photograph of the two fences on either side of the access is not what is subject to this application. The application is actually, the access is wider than that. So the applicant has the ability to move that fence over. So you can just about see the fence line marked very faintly on that. This application is for a much wider access. And the second aspect is the little lump on the top is the turning facility into the site. So the residential element is the bit within the blue area. The blue area is 8 metres wide. That retains all the trees, again, which the tree officer was not concerned with in terms of their value, but considers that this scheme would ensure that that belt of trees is retained. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Certainly on the last two speakers I've been very tolerant on the time element, but I thought it's fair that they both should be extended. Right, in that case I'm going to ask Suzanne if she's got any further comments. No, the answer is, in which case, councillors, it's over to you now for questions first, if you have any. And yes, Councillor Everett.
The last speaker quoted some appeal decisions, so I thought I'd do likewise. The most recent appeal decision in this district was made on the 15th of October by Jonathan Price, related to land south of Main Road, Alresford in Colchester. It's been quoted, in fact, this afternoon in the appeal that was taking place in this very room. And I'll read one section from it because it's absolutely significant to what the last speaker was saying. Although in the Ardley decision and other recent appeals, inspectors have given the conflict with LP policy QL1 only moderate weight, it is necessary to consider each case on its own merits. Whilst Alresford has a good range of services for an expanded village, these are insufficient to provide the basis for significantly more than the limited amount of development consistent with community needs required by policy. I find a significant degree of harm resulting from the conflict with the amount of housing proposed and the spatial strategy of LP policy QL1. Whilst out of date, this strategy remains consistent with the framework principles for plan-led sustainable development and patterns of growth which maximise the use of previously developed land and recognise the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside.
Right, thank you very much.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, further question, Councillor Heaney?
I just wanted to ask, I don't know how the applicant controls. There was a certain fence, a very smart new wooden fence down the sides of the house below the paddocks. And I just wondered how he controlled that and was able to knock down the fence and shove it over. Is he the owner of the bungalow or what?
I don't know what the ownership is indicated on that, so the additional ownership is in blue, but obviously the red indicates the application site. So that is what the application site is and what the applicant has control over.
Can I come back?
Yes.
Just seems a very odd turn then into the site. It's not a straight turn in. You've got to sort of come in and sort of instantly turn left and then go straight on. And the other question I wanted to ask was, where is the communal bin going to be, or likely to be?
I don't know. It's a reserved matters application, so all that information would be reserved as part of any detailed permission that would come forward.
Can I come? I've got one more question.
Yeah, go for it.
There doesn't seem to be any sort of wildlife survey. There were talk of newts in the garden, or have I missed that? I thought that would be something that Richard might pick up on. With the newts.
Right, Councillor Bennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reference has been made to the lack of main drainage in this area, so I just wondered if the officer could comment on that. And also, I can see no comments from Anglian Water about any flooding there may be, about any of the drainage. I've gone backwards and forwards. And the other thing is, I know from walking up and down Pork Lane delivering leaflets that there are very few footpaths. So I wondered whether what the footpath aspect is in this area for people having to walk up to the bus stop that don't have cars, because they would have to walk, I think it's about half a mile up to the main road. Thank you.
Right. Further speakers?
Well, I'd like to come back
yes.
about the drainage, if nobody else has put their hand up. I'd like to come back and talk about the drainage, and as Ewan will know, I'm obsessed with septic tanks. He had a whole hour about me banging on about them once. This is going to be 5 bungalows. A septic tank has to have a drainage away. Where is it going to drain to? Is it going to drain? You have to have a long drain, a long pipe. And I don't think these gardens with 5 bungalows will be long enough to drain the water away. And where they're going to drain it to, into the gardens of the next door houses, or where? I mean, that's a real thing to be considered. I remember going, we went recently up to look at the, up Cockane's Lane. I happened to be up Cockane's Lane. And we had a house there that was put in that is next door to the Taylor Wimpey houses. Beforehand, they were given permission. And even in dry weather, there was a nasty, stinky puddle outside the house, because that's on a septic tank with a too small garden. So there was this nasty puddle in the road, which we were having to remark on. I was up there with Fred and somebody else. And it's, that's what happens with septic tanks.
Thank you very much. Further comments? Yes, Councillor Alexander.
Can I ask, the entrance, will that be the entrance entire? Will it be any wider, or is that it as we see it?
It is difficult. I'll ask the officer to comment on it, but certainly I did notice this morning that this brand new fence that has been put up alongside, we've heard tonight that may have to come down, but officer, anything to comment on?
Well, you will know more than me visiting the site this morning in terms of the location of the fence, but all I can reiterate is what I previously said, is that the red site plan, wherever that might be on the ground, indicates land ownership for the applicant, and that would be where the application site were to be. It would be where the access will come from. It's a it's an outline application with all matters reserved, so there's no details of the specific point of access, so how wide it will be, whether it will be all that area. But there is a condition that's recommended that it would have a width of 5.5 metres throughout.
Right. Councillor Bennison, were you indicating you wish to speak?
Were you indicating? Sorry, Morris, were you indicating?
No, that's fine. Carry on.
Right.
Yeah, I think he was next.
Sorry.
Was it you, Liz?
No, not you. Right.
Sorry,
right.
Morris.
Councillor Alexander, then I'm sorry if I cut you off in your prime.
That was my fault. I was switched off.
Um,
Unloved, that's what it is.
The thing is that these septic tanks are bothering me slightly, because I do have some knowledge of these, having a septic tank in my own property in Little Baddow. And the mechanism by which it was emptied, the guy who came along and emptied it, has got to be compatible, the size of the vehicle has got to be compatible with what's inside of the septic tank. And it was quite a colossal thing. In some ways the same size as a Goliath, which for refuge. My concern is, how is that entrance going to be able to service the emptying of these tanks, and I know this will be brought on and further on, but we're looking at some parts of it now, and clarity is really important to be able to make a decision, and that does bother me because I can tell you that no machine can get up that entrance that we saw this morning to empty a septic tank. There would just not be enough room for it, and turning would be impossible.
I'll come back if I may. Nobody else is involved. I'm still banging on about septic tanks, but I've had a septic tank on clay, and it just doesn't work. And they're absolutely hopeless. It's no good. You've got to have sand and gravel to have a successful septic tank, or a much more loamy soil. And you do have to have them open. People think, oh, septic tanks, everything drains away, but it doesn't. You have to have them emptied once a year. And I can't see one of these great tankers, which is certainly as big as the old milk tankers that go around, or even petrol tankers go around, and then they have to have great long, sort of huge sort of pipes, steel pipes to, empty it. And I don't see how that's going to work, personally, in a development like that.
Right. Yes, Councillor Benson.
Oh, sorry, was it off? Yes. Oh, right. We're moving away from septic tanks then. Mention was also made of the wildlife on this particular plot. Has there been any... that's another thing I can't see on here. Anything regarding to an environmental report?
Right, I think Suzanne indicated that she wanted to come in. I don't know whether to talk about septic tanks or wildlife, but one of those anyhow.
In terms of the last question, there hasn't been any ecological surveys for the site. And in terms of the potential septic tank and drainage, it is an outline application. We've got no information about what methods of drainage is proposed. And that would come forward as part of a reserved matters. In terms of any comments that have been received from Anglo Water and from Essex County Council Flood Authority, the application is below the threshold for which they would provide comments, so we don't have any comments in those. And any septic tank would be controlled by building regulations in terms of its ability to cope and the details of that.
Can I come back on a bloody septic tank?
I've had my arm twisted. Certain councillor wants to talk septic tanks.
I want to talk about septic tanks again. That is just not... It doesn't work. I've got the whole thing that I spent 2 hours banging, or an hour, it gets out talking to Ewan about, that you have to have a length of pipe to make it legal to get out of the garden, and it'll just go into the next door garden. So these small gardens, bungalows, will not be legal, and they still get passed. That's the whole point I'm making. The ones in Great Bromley, which I know, they manage to get past. What happens is they don't get building regs from Tendring. They get some tame building reg person who passes them, even when they're illegal. That's what, so it'll get past with these septic tanks, and then they'll have soggy, smelly gardens all round.
Right. Let us move off. Septic tanks. Once and for all. Yeah. Councillor McWilliams and then Councillor Everett.
It does worry me that we are talking about what, I won't say it anymore, but we're still talking about access though, aren't we? That's really where we're coming from on this. But I do get the strong feeling, if we're looking at septic tanks as well, the big vehicles that will have to come into that small entrance there, that is going to be a problem. So does it mean that the access isn't suitable? That's all I'm asking.
Well, you can see if it were minded to be approved, one of the conditions would be 5.5 metres, 15, 16 foot. I would have thought a tanker could get in 16 foot. Whether it could turn round when it got to the other end in that little hump piece or not, doubtful. But Councillor Everett.
Thank you. Can I ask officers, in terms of our rural policies, how would you define this settlement in a rural areas hierarchy?
Give us the page number, it might be quicker.
247. Shall I answer it? Be easy, really.
While we're searching, Councillor Cawthron, you indicated you'd like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just going back to the previous discussion about access, there also has to be a recycling and a refuse collection point within 15 metres of a highway, which might complicate access for larger vehicles.
Thank you. Yes, another point. Right. Do we know the policy?
Right, yeah, so in terms of the hierarchy, in terms of the adopted plan, Great Holland is defined as a village and rural settlement, and in terms of the emerging plan, it is a smaller rural settlement.
Thanks for that. In which case, I think policy RA4, housing development within defined villages, is pertinent here. It says, within the settlement development boundaries of defined villages, proposals for 6 or more dwellings will only be allowed in principal defined villages. Small groups of up to 5 dwellings may be appropriate within secondary defined villages. And in the other defined villages, which Great Holland is, housing development will take the form of infilling 1 to 3 houses. So I think this is probably a bit too big.
Right. Would you care to comment on it? And I'm going to remind members that we're well past our time, so if we can draw things to a conclusion, it would be helpful. Suzanne.
Yeah, so in terms of the points raised from the access, obviously it is a reserved matters, it is an outline application with access is a matter that is reserved. However, from the plan, it is clear that roughly where the access point will be. Having measured that access point, it is roughly 8 metres wide, which is larger than the required 5.5 that is the highway recommendation. In terms of the points that Councillor Everett had made, in terms of policy RA4, it's part of the Save Local Plan and potentially fairly out of date in terms of the housing policies, and that kind of specific number thing is not supported by the MPPF. So you need to have regard to actually what the MPPF says in terms of development. And yes, it does say that it should be plan-led approach, and you referred to an appeal decision. We've also referred to appeal decisions that take the different view. So I think coming to the principle of this development, it comes down to the weight that members wish to give appeal decisions as a material planning consideration, and how much weight they wish to give the appeal decisions as a material planning consideration, and also if they identify any harm in terms of the impact on the character of the area.
Right. Further thoughts? If not, is anybody in a position to make a proposition?
Can we ask why they didn't put in a wildlife survey? Don't they need to do that?
You may ask.
I just wondered, don't they have to put in a wildlife survey?
That would be a reasonable reason for refusal if members felt that there's likely to be protected species on that site.
Could be the newt.
Right. Further thoughts? No? I did say earlier. Yes.
Yeah.
Councillor Bennis.
I just feel it's very, very difficult for us to make a decision on this without all the relevant facts. You know, we haven't got a definitive answer on flooding, suds, septic tanks, mains drainage, environment. So how are we supposed to make a decision on this? Can you help us on, you know, how can we make a decision? You know, if we give permission for it, and then when it comes back in reserved matters, and we find out that all these things that we've queried at this stage are not there, or haven't been done, or we don't agree with them, where do we stand then?
I mean, I think in terms of the information that's been provided, it is an outline application, and the information that has been received is not dissimilar to the information that is received on all other outline applications. In terms of the point you raise, I mean, there has been an assumption that it will be a septic tank. We don't have that information. There are other methods of disposal of things like that, and that's down to the applicants to look at that when we've got the reserved matters application. I mean, ultimately, granting outline planning permission deals with the principle. It doesn't deal with the detail of the application. So if members were not happy with any of that potential details, then there's always the potential to refuse the reserved matters application.
I mean, can I come back here? I'm sorry, but you know, you do have to have this information, and about, you say there's some other way of draining. There isn't. They're not allowed to have these, you know, things that you have, cesspits. You can't have those. There is no other drainage apart from septic tanks. I know I'm obsessed with them, but if you had to live with one that didn't work on a clay soil, you'd be obsessed too. You know, and there is no other way of draining it without mains drains.
Well, Suzanne has told you, if you were minded to refuse it, this lack of the nature study would be a reason that you could use and would stand up, coupled with the latest planning inspector's guidance. Is there anything else? And then you go, yes, Councillor Everett.
I think I may have something else here, which is the whole concept of backland residential development. Proposals for the residential development of backland sites must comply with the following criteria. D, the site must not comprise an awkwardly shaped or fragmented parcel of land likely to be difficult to develop in isolation or involve development which could prejudice a more appropriate comprehensive development solution. E, the site must not be on the edge of defined settlements and likely to produce a hard urban edge or other form of development out of character in its particular setting. And F, the proposal must not be out of character with the area or set a harmful precedent for other similar forms of development. And that E one, I think, is particularly apposite because you've got ribbon development along roads here in both cases, and so therefore actually creating the backland development in the middle here changes the character of it entirely.
Yeah.
Hope that helps.
Right. Any further proposals then? Yes, Councillor McWilliams.
Okay, I'll go for it. All the points that have just been raised, put that forward as a refusal. I'm happy to do that.
Right.
But, you know, I'm not 100%, but every time we sort of talk about this, something else comes forward as a reason to refuse. Will you? Okay. We'll just see how the next bit goes, and I can see Charlotte's thinking.
I've got a proposer and a seconder. I shall ask the officer now for comments on have we got sufficient points there?
Yeah, I think just for me to confirm, the debate and members' views. So it's contrary to QL1 in terms of the principle of development being outside the settlement boundary, and contrary to the backland policies, whatever they may be, and the lack of ecology survey.
Right. We've heard it. I'm not going to stretch it out any more. You've heard what the officers' views are. We've got a proposer and a seconder for refusal. Those in favour of refusal, please show. That, I'll stick my 2p in, is unanimous. It is refused.
Oh, we've got a good record.
Councillors, you know our guidelines say that we finish at 10 o'clock. However, we are down to the last one, and I can see that we have in the gallery somebody who sat through all evening to speak on this. With your forbearance, we will take that last one rather than come back on another day. Does that get agreement? I think they must have gone to sleep, but it seems to get nods generally, so that's we will do. Right? Right. Oh, well, yes, she was going to on this particular item, so... Right, in that case, we will grab it. It is application 18-01-693 full. It's for an addition at 34 Low Road, Dovercourt, and Matthew's got this one as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yep, this application relates to a side extension to a property of 34 Low Road. It's before members tonight because it's a councillor's application. The application site is located on the northern side of Low Road and forms part of a recent housing development built within the last 10 years at Hope House. It's a largely residential area, and the site's surrounded by residential properties and some care homes to the south. You see the site outlined in red. It's a view of the front elevation of the application dwelling. So it's a chalet-style property with rooms in the roof space, and the garage serving the property is located to the side. They're intending to extend onto this side, the eastern side of the property. You see this closest property to the development is number 22 Newport Close, which is located to the east, and its rear garden backs onto the side of this property. So that rear garden backs onto where the side extension will be located. So the boundary in this location is marked by a mixture of hedgerow and fencing. This is a view from within the Hope House development looking back towards the applicant's property. And this is 22 Newport Close. You can see there's hedge on the boundary along with fencing as well. So the extensions proposed to the side extends the majority of the depth of the property and extends up to the side boundary of that property, up against the boundary at the rear of number 22. It's existing elevations. And here's the proposed side extension. So it does extend up just below the ridge height. There won't be any first floor accommodation. It's a vaulted ceiling, so it'll be open, void to the roof space. It extends out the kitchen and the dining area. The elevation presenting itself to 22 Newport Avenue is blank, so there'll be no openings on that side. To the rear is a roof light. As you'll see from the update sheet, in response to objections received, the applicant has submitted this plan as well, which shows a 9.4 metre separation distance between the side of the extension and the rear of number 22. And it also shows that sunlight would not be interrupted at the back of that property as it accords with the 25-degree rule as set out in the Essex Design Guide. So, looking at policies, Save Policy HG14 states that 1 metre to the boundary should be retained, but that's only in locations where it would stop a cramped development. So in this case, because it's not a continuous street frontage, there's good gap between the properties. That rear garden is going to be retained. there wouldn't be a terracing effect being created, and there wouldn't be an impact in terms of that appearing cramped. So that the main aims and aspirations of that policy are not in conflict with this development. In terms of the impact upon the neighbours, obviously it will be closer to them. The extension extends out 2.7 metres, so that would be 2.7 metres closer to them, and they'll be presented with this blank elevation. But in terms of the actual visual impact from their rear garden, it's not considered to be significantly detrimental to their amenity. Any openings within that side elevation would need planning permission, so privacy is retained. And in terms of overshadowing, the sun obviously comes around from east to west, so there'll be slightly more overshadowing in the later afternoon, but again not significantly detrimental to the neighbours' amenities. So in this respect, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have one speaker against the application, Ms. Sharon Wotton, I find. Good. Welcome, Ms. Wotton. You'll have... right. If you can shove your microphone on when you're settled, and you have 3 minutes. So.
Thank you very much.
That's
Sorry,
it.
I seem rather stupid. But only that we feel that the existing plans for a double height extension, which is in effect the same height as and could be a 2-storey extension, is encroaching, intimidating, and will overshadow our living space. This markedly spoils the pleasure of our garden. We object on the grounds of the following. The policy HG14 that's been mentioned and the gov.uk recommendation for a minimum of 1 metre from the boundary line has been disregarded, and without this, this extension could not be facilitated. The hedge was to remain to screen and soften the new build, that's the original, for existing neighbours and part of the original approved permission. Provision of appropriate evergreen planting has ensured that the proposed properties would not appear overbearing for the residents of Newport Close. This hedge was supposed to be retained. It had been there for 37 years as a mature hedge when we moved there. And that now actually, unfortunately, that's been damaged and no longer. The shrubs or trees will not be able to be grown or replanted due to the complete loss of light underneath this building at the back of our garden. We will not be able to have any vegetation there. The space proposed for this extension was never intended as a building plot, but as an area to maintain a respectful distance from existing neighbours and to minimise the loss of light and maintain a sense of space. I quote TDC officer for the original build, in particular, the scale, form, layout and design of the development is considered acceptable and would not compromise the amenities of the occupiers of existing adjacent dwellings. This, of course, is with the void in excess of 2 metres. The loss of the sense of space and the loss of light, both in the garden and perceived in the living area of the home, will be significant in our opinion, and a lot of this is based on opinion. The proposed extension will give the appearance of cramping, changing the spacious character and appearance of the neighbourhood, again based on opinion. This is our opinion. We have huge concerns on how this build is to be achieved regarding lack of building space and for future maintenance or remedial work, and feel this would also be an invasion of our home and privacy. As I've already mentioned, the hedge has been partially removed. This was done on Sunday, and this is exposing our living space to be directly overlooked through a side window in 34 Low Road, and this has compromised our privacy. So I don't know the reasons for this, why this was done on Sunday, except that now we are now directly looked into by an existing window. We ask that the above is given full attention before any final decision is made on this application. And just to go back, that I've seen that the one before these people, there was something about a hedge to be retained. The officer said a hedge to be retained because people were concerned that cars would be visible. Well, this hedge was supposed to be retained, and that doesn't mean a thing because it hasn't been. And also about boundaries round this backfill, the last one, there was plenty of distance to respect existing neighbours. That too can be changed historically, and I personally believe that respectful distance from existing neighbours should stand the test of time. It's a principle. Respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have parish council or ward members or agent on this one, so I'll just ask Matthew if he's got anything to add. Nothing to add. Councillors, it's in your hands. We saw the site this morning, and I believe I'm right in saying we were told this morning by the officer that there was a slight gap between the edge of this proposed building and the fence line. Am I right on that? It was going to be 300 mil or something like that, but
330, Chair.
Yeah, that's right.
Building at 6 inches, a person can't get down there.
It's a flat face wall, isn't it, all the way out?
Yes. No, there's no windows or anything like that. Right, speakers then, please.
Liz Benson.
Councillor Benson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm confused by this. I mean, we're looking at what looks like a two-storey extension there, but it's described as a single-storey side extension. I know Matthew said there's a vaulted ceiling in there, but if it's only required to be a single-storey side extension and it did have a lower height, there would probably be no objection from the neighbour, bearing in mind that we do have this foot width, so it's not coming right up to the boundary, but it just seems peculiar that it's that height for a single storey, unless there's the hope that it might become a two-storey in the future. So I wonder if we have any information on why it is 2 storeys high.
All I can say on that is it's the applicant's personal choice to submit an application with a dining room with a vaulted ceiling with a roof light to the rear to provide light. I've got no information as to whether they intend to build into that, but we can only assess what's shown on the plans before us.
You will notice that, as with any extensions, it is set back slightly, and it's below the top line as well. Now, Councillor McWilliams is waving a hand, but
No, I was just saying, because it's got the hip on the top and everything. But I'm assuming, obviously, there was not a need there for our tree officer to come out and have a little inspection because the property's so new. Because I wasn't sure as to what side of the fence that the hedge was. So was there a hedge along that gap there?
Yeah, you can see the hedgerow there, and that could be removed by the applicants at any time.
Can I say something?
Yep, Councillor Heaney.
I mean, if there's only a foot, how are they going to build round there? Who does the fence belong to? Is that the neighbour's fence? Which it might very well be, because the way it seems to be the other way round. I mean, they can't remove that fence. How are they going to build and do their pointing and all that in a unless they're absolutely skinny, in a foot space? And what about scaffolding, which they're going to have to use and things? I mean, that just seems you doesn't seem enough room to build it.
Lean over.
So they're
Oh, is that what they do?
It can be done.
Yeah, they're civil issues that sort of sit outside planning, so arrangements would have to be made with adjoining owners as to how they would construct it.
Right. Further points? In which case, if you've got no discussion points, do I have a proposal? Or have at this posting 11 o'clock hour everybody fallen to sleep? Yes, yes, Councillor McWilliams.
Oh, sorry, I've fallen asleep. I know, terrible.
As I personally cannot see any reason for refusal, and wait a minute, has somebody just shaken his head? If somebody has just shaken his head for some reason, I'll come back to you, if you don't mind, Chairman.
I
Thank
don't
you.
think it's a planning reason that he shakes his head.
Side isolation.
Yeah.
Policy HG14 below is intended to amplify adopted replacement structure plan policy BE1 in ensuring that new development does not result in overdevelopment, unsympathetic change and loss of amenity. The District Planning Authority considers that the side spaces created between buildings are of the utmost importance in areas of medium and low density housing. In such areas, development up to a common side boundary normally appears cramped, often creating an unbalanced terraced effect. Indeed, in many locations, even the minimum 1 metre side isolation space between a dwelling and the side boundary of the site, as specified in the policy, would appear unsatisfactory visually. In such instances, larger side isolation space will be required. Yeah, that's all you need to know.
Well, no, it's not side, is it? It's a back. It's not side. It's side by side.
Side.
Yeah, I would say that HG14, the main thrust of that policy is to ensure that you're not getting a terracing development and continuous development. Because you've got you'll retain a 9.4 metre space to the rear of that property. I think there's still sufficient space between those properties.
Yeah. Right, Councillor McWilliams.
Can I carry on now, please? Now we've had that one explained. Thank you very much for that, Richard. Can I therefore recommend approval of the application? And I don't have to give any reasons, I just want to approve it.
That's in line. Seconders? Anybody will second that? Councillor Hones will second it. In which case, we are looking at the... gone to the wrong one. The recommendation of approval as written on page... there we go. I've lost it on page, but thank you very much for that, councillors.
Richard wants to ask a question.
I'm going to put it to the vote. I've got a proposer and seconder, but Richard did indicate earlier, so I'm told. So therefore, I'll let him put his point.
Right. How tall is this dwelling?
It's just short of the existing roof.
It's more than 4 metres, is it?
Yeah.
Right. Even though we've established that side isolation can form terracing between a load of things, it's actually not how the policy itself is written. It says proposals for detached, semi-detached and end terrace dwellings, including extensions to these dwellings over 4 metres in height, will be required to retain appropriate open space between the dwelling and the side boundaries of the plot, to ensure that new development is appropriate in its setting and does not create a cramped appearance, and to safeguard the amenities and aspect of adjoining residents, and in the case of undeveloped adjacent plots, their satisfactory development at a later stage. As a guideline, a minimum distance of 1 metre will be sought. Where circumstances warrant it, a greater distance will be expected.
Right. I have a proposer. I have a seconder. If we have a vote on that, and if it's granted, it will go through. If it isn't, I'll be looking for a second proposal. So you know what you're up to. Those in favour of approving this application, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the proposal to accept is lost, in which case I want a second.
We know you're
We didn't have an abstention, no.
How many councillors are here tonight? You've lost Maria, so it makes 9. Because you had 10 of you and Maria's gone. But we're going to have to just pause until John comes back. We can't do anything else until he's back from the bathroom.
Maybe he's gone.
Chair, can I make a suggestion off record that we confiscate these books?
I think that would be a...
I'm actually very pleased you look up and you really do the work. It means that we don't have to do it because you can do it for us.
Well,
I think it should be further
while
away.
John is out, I'll ask you to have a think on what the proposal will be.
The proposal will be from me proposing...
Can we wait until everyone's
yes.
back in the room, please? Thank you.
Yeah, we have to really. But all I was saying, just have a think about it so that you can...
If it was further back, I wouldn't mind it. It's their fence, I'm sure. If you look at that fence, that belongs to the neighbours' house. That's not their fence, anyway. It's their fence.
He's got a bursting bladder.
Yeah, I think it is. 'Cause it's got a big house. Yeah, I mean, I don't care. And then just not make it 2 feet smaller.
Right.
Make 2 feet.
Let's get on.
I propose refusal of this application on grounds of policy HG14 site isolation.
I have a proposer and a seconder. Any comment, Matthew? We're going against the officer's recommendation again, so we shall want to know the reasons.
Yeah, there's no further comment from myself. HG14, as Councillor Everett read out, states I do believe that there wouldn't be a cramped appearance and it wouldn't impact upon the neighbours, but obviously that's the view, and you're entitled to move the.
Right, now those who are here can vote, so it's those in favour of a refusal, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. Have I counted correctly?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's 4.
That's 4.
Councillor Cawthorne, Everett, Benison.
And those... have a think, please. I know it's very late. Those in favour of refusal, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's 5, 4. It is refused. Colleagues, I'm sorry, it's 5 to 11. I don't propose we so do anything else other than close the meeting.
I'll just say thank you. Thank you.
Turned down everything. We'll be in the paper again. Terrible Tendring Council. Bloody awful. I'm not against them.
there a separate charger for the chairman? Oh, do they? I wasn't sure if they all fitted. Thank you.